Peace and love, family. Welcome back to the Hope, the HOPE, helping our people elevate. Today I'm going to be doing my first reaction video from the Julian Johnson Law channel, but it's going to be on the Cabiness family, the Cabiness Family Massacre. And so this was something that I ran across, and as I went over a small, maybe the first 10 minutes, I was like, let me react to this and see how the people would, you know what I mean? So if you're new here, I appreciate you for checking the content out. This is my first reaction video. If this is not your first time here, like I always say, I appreciate you for coming and helping me build this platform up. So without holding y'all, we're going to jump into it.
This is a tough story to tell. And if you can, I really want you to watch all of it. But don't do it for me. Do it for the Black people who lived through this, the ones who actually went through this horror. Because the people I'm going to talk about deserve to be remembered. They deserve more than to be lost to the halls of injustice. Black people have suffered so much in this country, but it's our job to tell these stories, to remember our people, to say their names. And that's what I've committed myself to doing. And I want you to continue joining me on this journey, to help tell the stories of those who lived and died in injustice, those who have been forgotten. This history is hard to hear, but it's necessary. And in this video, I want to tell you about what happened to the Cabiness family in 1918. Before I get into what happened, let me tell you about this family, because this isn't just about a single act of injustice. This was an injustice against an entire family. And I can't tell you about what happened to one of them without telling you about all of them. To truly understand the depth of this tragedy, we have to go back to the beginning, so you can see not just what was lost, but what was stolen. So you can feel the weight of this pain, the tragedy, and the injustice that fell onto this family. In 1845, a white slave owner from South Carolina named Samuel Calhoun relocated to Texas. The soil in East Texas was rich and it was plentiful, attracting white farmers from all over who were eager to produce corn and cotton and livestock. Sam Calhoun was among them, seeking wealth and prosperity, not through hard work of his own, but on the backs of the enslaved Black people that he owned. Calhoun brought with him a very large family, including many of his.
I want y'all to remember that the word slave comes from the word Slavic, and I'm not discrediting anything he's saying, but also this is 1918 in Texas, so remember, we've been taught wrong. They've rewritten books and rewritten the definition of meaning for words, but I'm not going to stop too long. So,
his 8 children. One of his daughters, Martha, had married a man named James Cabiness. Together, they left South Carolina and made the journey to Texas, bringing with them a 13-year-old enslaved Black child named Elijah Cabiness. Alongside Elijah were other enslaved Black people, owned by the Calhoun and Cabiness families, all of whom were forced to endure the grueling trip from one state of bondage to the brutality of another. While these 2 white families were searching for more land and more wealth and more power, all that awaited Elijah and the others was more pain and more suffering. The Cabiness family settled about 6 miles north of Huntsville, Texas, along the Trinity River. We don't know exactly what life was like for Elijah Cabiness, but we have a pretty good idea. We know because of accounts from formerly enslaved Black people who lived in this part of Texas. One of them, John McAdams, was from Walker County, Texas. Years later, he recalled that Black people worked from before the sun came up until long after it went down. They worked the fields and tended to cattle all day, kept at the plantation from morning to night. And even after the sunset, their work still wasn't done. They had to milk the cows and feed the horses and mules and hogs.
can y'all imagine the stress, just what they went through from sun up to sundown? And then when you finish, you still got to keep going. Now you got to milk the horses, the cows. I'm sorry, you got to milk the cows. You got to feed the horses and tend to the other animals on the plant, what they call plantation. But also the word plantation also deals with vegetation.
Only then, after an entire day of backbreaking labor, could they finally eat. It was horrific, backbreaking work, and it never stopped. That was life for Elijah Cabiness. Elijah was freed with the end of the Civil War and the passage of the 13th Amendment in 1865, which abolished slavery. But like most Black people who were freed, it was not freedom at all. As Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. will later say, freedom for Black people was freedom to hunger and freedom to the winds and rains of heaven. It was freedom without food, freedom without land. And because of that, it was freedom and famine at the same time. At the moment of emancipation, Black people had nothing, no land, no wealth, no resources to start over. They were free, but but very much still in bondage. Elijah would have had to deal with the racial violence that Black people were subjected to after emancipation. Newly freed Black people in Walker County were often the targets of whites who were angry that they lost their property and felt that an injustice had been done to them as a result of the Civil War. Black people were beaten and exploited, and many lost their lives for simply existing as free men and women in Walker County. In fact, on the very day that emancipation was announced in Huntsville, a Black person lost their life. After learning that they were freed, Black people began shouting and celebrating their freedom. This angered a white man who was watching. He rode his horse by a Black woman and leaned over and nearly cut the woman in two with his weapon. He took her life. But despite all of the chaos,
that's crazy. But I was going to ask, do y'all feel like that we've been free? Do y'all feel like we free? Or do you feel like slavery still exists, but in a new modern sense? Leave a comment below.
Freedom brought, Elijah kept pushing forward. After federal troops arrived in Texas in 1867 to stop the violence being inflicted on Black people, Elijah was able to do something that Black people had never done before. He registered to vote. Here was a man born into slavery in South Carolina, a man who had known nothing but injustice and brutality his entire life. And now he was voting. This is a copy of the 1867 to 1869 Texas voter registration.
You know, a lot of people died for those voting rights, and I'm gonna stop pausing it, but I'm gonna stop pausing it so close. But a lot of people died for those voting rights. I did a video on that, and a lot of quote unquote white men or Europeans were upset the so-called Blacks, first the Black men before our women, but they were allowed voting rights. And a lot of people, like I said, it's crazy, but.
Notice Elijah's name is highlighted in orange. By 1870, Elijah was married to a woman named Caroline, but something happened to her. We don't know exactly what happened because there are no records of her after 1871. But what we do know is that Elijah kept moving forward. He kept navigating his new freedom with success. And by 1871, he had a new wife, Evelyn Calhoun. The two moved to Grants Colony, Texas. That's in East Texas, where they worked hard and established a farm. Elijah became so successful as a farmer that he was able to secure crop loans in 1872, in 1875, and 1878. Elijah was one of the most successful and prominent free Black men in Grants Colony. He not only owned land, but two of his sons, Elbert and Allen, attended the local school for Black families. It was at this school that Allen Cabiness met Sarah Carter. But all of this was soon put in danger. In 1877, the Reconstruction era ended. In exchange for winning the presidency, Rutherford B. Hayes agreed to withdraw federal troops from the South, allowing Southern states to control their own affairs. This ushered in the era of Jim Crow and racial terror. All across the South, any progress that Black people had was wiped away. Reconstruction.
One thing I always say about the Jim Crow era, or just the ancestors in general, it didn't have to do with the Jim Crow era. Well, I talk about it, but I tell people, because meeting the descendants of the 1921 massacre and hearing their stories and like seeing other videos of the elders who have passed away, but that were from that event, that time frame, the 1921 massacre, it makes me think about everything that those people went through. You know what I'm saying? Because they were children when Tulsa was bombed, when that happened here. But when I think about them seeing, like this was before their time, but this is 1918. This is before their time. But they saw Dr. King, they saw Malcolm X, they saw the Black Panther Party rise, the Nation of Islam, and they saw all these movements. And then those two that are still here today, I believe it's the last two, maybe it was three, but I think it's two still here. I don't want to be wrong, so forgive me for that. But they've seen all these movements, all this progress, or what was supposed to have been progress, to see us in the state we are today, knowing that our people come from greatness, that we come from royalty, literally, kings, queens, the concept of gods and goddesses, but not like what y'all think with the religious concept. That's not what they were talking about. But we come from rulership, leaders, you know what I'm saying? And we don't honor that. That's a problem for me.
It was replaced with black codes. It was replaced with convict leasing and with lynching and with segregation. And the path forward for Black families, like Elijah Cabiness, was fraught with danger and pain. However, despite everything, Elijah Cabiness continued to thrive. By 1880, he owned 160 acres of land, valued at more than $1,000. He used his wealth and his resources to help his children gain land of their own. In 1883, he purchased 157 acres for his son, Allen. And by 1884, Allen had married Sarah Carter. Like his father, Allen wanted to build on what Elijah had given him. He and Sarah started a family, welcoming their first son, Sam Norman, in 1884. They went on to have at least 8 children between 1891 and 1901. But after 2 decades of marriage, Allen and Sarah divorced in 1907. The divorce petition filed by Allen put the blame squarely on Sarah. It accused her of being violent and attacking him and not living up to her marriage contract. But we have to take that with a grain of salt, because the allegations Allen made against Sarah were almost identical to the ones his older brother Elbert used when he divorced his third wife just 5 years earlier in 1902. Sarah kept going. She continued to raise her children and build a life for herself. She stayed on the land that her and Allen had, and Allen moved out. By the time of the 1910 census, Sarah was listed as the head of her household, with 6 of her children still living with her. 24-year-old Sam Norman, 19-year-old Bessie, 14-year-old George, 12-year-old Doria, and 9-year-old Lena. I needed to tell you all of this history so you could understand just how much this family had accomplished, how they had done what so many Black families never got the chance to do. They made it through slavery. They obtained land and wealth and stability. And they did it despite every barrier designed to keep Black people down. Barriers like Black codes and convict leasing.
I've done 2 videos on the Black Code, so if I don't know what the Black Codes are, the 1724 Christian Black Codes, there were 54 articles. They were a set of laws or a set of structure that stripped the people of their nationality, their identity, their birthrights, their lawful inheritance, reclassifying them as Negroes, Blacks, Coloreds, etc., African American, and now they don't have anything. Now they're less than human. Again, 3rd grade grammar, black, white, green, purple, blue, whatever color we want to deal with. I've done a video on this color concept. This is 1684, Francis Bonner. But if you want to call anything, if you identify as a color, then you're calling yourself an adjective. It's not a noun. You're not a human. You're saying that you're less than. So you're going to be treated as less than. You have no rights because of who you identify as. But yeah, those Black codes, they came from the Code Noir, which noir, N-O-I-R, is a French word. And in French, noir means black. And so the Code Noir came from King Louis of France. King Louis. This is where Louisiana is named after. But yeah, the Black codes. So it was the Code Noir in 1685, I believe. And then you had the Black codes of 1724.
Despite all of it, this family thrived. But Jim Crow still ruled the day. And for Black people, no matter how much you built, no matter how much wealth you obtained or how successful you became, your race could erase all of it in an instant. By 1917,
again, race. This is Francis Bonner, 1684. So he's also a Frenchman. So this is what I'm saying. This is where they stripped the indigenous people of their rights, their land, and their inheritance, their birthrights. And then you had the king come in right behind it and take that ideology and apply it to so-called Black people. So this is why we don't have anything. This is why they erased the history and taught a false. The Reconstruction era is why it's called Reconstruction.
Sarah was around 55 years old. She had been divorced for a decade, and most of her and Allen's children were now grown. At this time, the United States was deep in World War I, and men were needed to fight. By 1917, the U.S. passed the Selective Service Act, ushering in the draft for men between ages of 21 and 31. 2 of Sarah and Allen's sons, 24-year-old Clifton and 22-year-old Tanola, registered for the draft. We were able to find records of their registration. This is Clifton's draft card, and this is Tanola. At the time, the eldest Cabiness son, Sam Norman, was around 33 and not eligible for the draft. But the 2 Cabiness sons who were within the age range, Clifton and Tanola, complied with the law and registered. Little did they know that their entire family's lives were about to change forever because of this. Even though Clifton and Tanola registered without issue, Walker County Sheriff Thomas E. King had it in his mind that Sarah's youngest son, George, was also supposed to register and had failed to comply with the law. But George was only 20 years old. He was born in 1897 and not eligible for the draft. But still, Sheriff King claimed that George's school record showed that he was born in 1894, making him 23 and draft eligible. Now, this made no sense. Sarah's other two sons registered without any issue. It would have made no sense for the family to hold George back and risk arrest and prosecution. But Sheriff...
It's crazy. I'm sitting and listening like they were forcing, like that's an issue. Hold on, I gotta go back. I gotta hear it again.
But George was only 20 years old. He was born in 1897 and not eligible for the draft. But still, Sheriff King claimed that George's school record showed that he was born in 1894, making him 23 and draft eligible. Now, this made no sense. Sarah's other two sons registered without any issue. It would have made no sense for the family to hold George back and risk arrest and prosecution. But Sheriff King was convinced that's exactly what happened. Believing Sarah and George were lying, he notified U.S. Marshal J.A. Herring, and Herring didn't ask any questions. He didn't conduct any investigation. He didn't check the facts. He simply notified other law enforcement officers about this so-called failure to register. On July 3rd, 1917, Marshal Herring sent a letter to the U.S. Attorney for Houston, John E. Green, Jr. They were moving fast to bring federal charges against George Cabiness. Because George was black, he wasn't deserving of a second thought. There was no room for doubt, no possibility that...
Do y'all know that this country has thousands of wrongful convictions against black people or so-called black people? But again, like I said, it's that label. And I'm not making this video about that, but just knowing that in my mind, I have to say that. But so many of our people, like here I he's saying how they're rushing this process to convict this young man without doing no fact checks, without making sure that there's no mistakes, but just simply on the fact that he's black, on that status. And again, race, then this whole race concept is made up. But I don't want to, like, I'm going to do a video on that again. For those who haven't, I have done one. Go check that out. If you haven't and you made it this far, hit that subscribe button if you're new, or hit that like button. Show me some love.
He might have been telling the truth. Soon, the Bureau of Investigation, the predecessor to the FBI, began investigating George Cabiness for failing to register for the draft. All of this manpower, all of these resources, spent on one black man over something this small. But when you were black, the infraction didn't matter. All that mattered was your race, and your race meant quick, swift, and severe punishment. But what happened to George was not an isolated incident. The draft during World War I wasn't just about serving your country. It was about who was forced to serve and who was given a free pass. And like so many things in American history, race played a major role in deciding who would wear the uniform in war. Black men were nearly 3 times more likely than white men to be prosecuted for draft evasion. Now, that's not because black men were dodging the draft more. It's because the system was stacked against them. Local draft boards, which were entirely run by white men, had the power to decide who got drafted and who got to stay home. And they used that power to target black men unfairly. The numbers prove it. Black men made up a small portion of draft registrants, but they were still overrepresented among those sent to war. Nearly 1 in 3 black men who registered, about 34%, were forced to fight, while only 24% of white men faced the same fate. Now, that wasn't by accident. The system was designed that way. White men were given deferments and excuses to stay home. Black men, they weren't given that option. More than half, 52%, were classified as eligible for the draft, compared to just 32% of white men. And when black people questioned why the numbers were so lopsided, draft boards had a ready-made excuse. They claimed that black men were poor and had fewer financial hardships that would exempt them from service. But the truth was that the system was never meant to be fair. It was meant to put the burden of war on black men while protecting white men from the same risks. Even if a black man had a clear exemption, whether for health reasons or family responsibilities or on legal grounds, that didn't mean he was safe. Draft boards often ignored these exemptions and sent black men off to war anyway. Meanwhile, white men who should have been drafted found ways to avoid service, often with the help of those on the draft board. But the discrimination didn't stop there. Law enforcement and even private citizens played a role in targeting black men for so-called draft delinquency. The Bureau of Investigation, along with local sheriffs and post office workers, and even vigilantes.
It's like they were setting them up to be killed. So you can let the white boys, so-called white boys, escape. They didn't have to go through it, but y'all was forcing the so-called black boys to go through it.
vigilante groups made sure that black men were punished at much higher rates than whites. The accusations against black men weren't based on real evidence, but on racist stereotypes. They were called lazy and ignorant, or accused of having a natural tendency to roam. These were the same racist stereotypes that have been used for centuries to justify everything from slavery to lynching and Jim Crow law. And the numbers prove just how unbalanced the system was. In Texas, for example, black men made up just 16% of the population, but they accounted for 25% of the draftees. Now, that's not a coincidence. That's intentional. Texas officials were especially aggressive when it came to pursuing black men accused of avoiding the draft. Federal agents in the state launched more investigations into black draft suspects.
How you gonna force me to go fight your war when you didn't rape, lynch, murdered, massacred my people? Now you want to force me to go fight for you? And if I don't fight for you, you gonna lock me up, or you gonna do something harmful to me and my family because I don't fight for you after what you just did to me? See, that does not make sense to me. But let's keep going.
Than anywhere else in the country. And prosecutors in Texas were among the harshest when it came to bringing cases against them. Draft boards did not need anyone to tell them that every black man in a uniform means one less white man on the front line. George Cabiness was just one of many black men being unfairly targeted and prosecuted. Take Andrew Felder. He was arrested in Brenham, Texas in 1918 because the government claimed that he was the right age for the draft, but he had no birth certificate to prove his age. His mother, who couldn't read or write, had no official records, so they threw him in jail, and he sat there for 4 months before they finally let him go. Then there was George Johnson. He was picked up in Liberty, Texas in June of 1918 for supposedly failing to register. The sheriff locked him up for 5 months, even after the war ended, even after the draft wasn't needed anymore. He was kept in jail until May of 1919, just because they could, just because he was black. So when we talk about racism in the draft, we're not...
Like I say, and I've done interviews with brothers on my channel who are wrongfully convicted. There are so many people who are under these people's chains still today, just based on their status, what we call race. But in law, it's their status. Who are you? What are you? But this man.
Not just talking about unequal treatment. We're talking about a system that deliberately placed the burden of war on black men while protecting white men from the same risks. And this wasn't just about the draft. It was about injustice. Injustice was everywhere. It invaded every part of black life. It wasn't just the most horrific things like lynchings. It wasn't just the everyday humiliations like riding in the back of the bus or being told to get off the sidewalk when a white person walks down the street. It was everything in between. It was a constant siege, a system working at every level to remind black people of their place, to strip them of their rights, their dignity, and even their lives by sending them off to die in war thousands of miles away, fighting for freedoms they would never be allowed to have at home themselves. And so with this, the federal government set its sights on George Cabiness. On July 14, 1917, George was officially charged with draft dodging. He became the latest black man charged with trying to get out of fighting for freedom abroad while being denied the same freedom at home.
Right, that's what I'm saying. Like, make that make sense. Like, how you come slaughter people, you know what I'm saying? Whether you want to say we came from ships or not, or whether you want to say we indigenous to this land. Either way it go, you came and invaded and you took and you did all these horrific things, and they always holler get over it. But y'all get over the stuff that y'all be wanting us to remember, the 9/11s and the Oklahoma City bombing and all that. But get over that. You want us to get over all the massacres and all the slaughtering and everything. Get over that. Get over all, you know what I'm saying, all the other stuff. Get over that. Because how you come invade and take and slaughter and then force me to fight for you? That don't make sense to me. And then since I don't fight for you, you lock me up, you incarcerate me, take me from my family. You've already took me from everything, so yeah, you're going to take me from my family, I guess, on this. And one question I always tell people, I'm going to push play again, but if we did come from somewhere else, why can't they deport us back to where we came from? Or won't they send us back to where we came from? Think on that.
One day after he was charged, Sheriff King detained George and forcibly made him go to the draft board and register. Sarah tried to defend and protect her son. She continued to explain that he was not 23, but he was only 20 years old. Sheriff King was not trying to hear any of that. He arrested Sarah and charged her with conspiring to avoid the draft. After spending 4 days in jail, George and Sarah had their first court appearance before U.S. Commissioner A.L. Jackson in Houston on July 16, 1917. The prosecutor presented evidence that Sarah had signed affidavits in 1907 and 1908 stating that George was born in 1894, which would have made him old enough for the draft. But a more recent affidavit from 1917 listed his birth as 1897, meaning he was too young to serve. After the hearing, Sarah was allowed to post a $200 bond and was released. But George wasn't so lucky. He was held over and placed in Harris County Jail because he couldn't afford to make bond. While he sat in jail, the federal grand jury took up his case. For over 2 months, George remained behind bars while the grand jury reviewed the charges against him. And finally, on October 2nd, 1917, the federal grand jury reached its decision. George and Sarah had not lied about his age to avoid the draft. In fact, the grand jury came back with the most obvious conclusion. George, along with several other men who had been charged with him, simply lacked birth certificates and official government records that would have made reporting an exact birth date a simple matter. Because of this, the grand jury ruled that there was no case. Neither George nor Sarah had done anything wrong or broken any laws. Now, this wasn't unusual. Many black families at the time didn't have official birth records. Southern states had long failed to document black births the same way they did for white citizens, making it nearly impossible for some to prove their exact.
This is why a lot of us here in Oklahoma, a lot of melanated people, have a hard time getting their history. Or people around, a lot of people across the state, I'm assuming, but I say here because it's what I know of. But a lot of people that try to get their quote unquote Indian tribal cards and stuff like that here, it's hard for them to get those roll numbers because they can't trace that lineage. But as the brother is explaining, this was all by design. They didn't document certain of our people for a reason. They wanted to erase that. They probably did document it and got rid of it, trashed it, burned it, threw it away, destroyed it in some kind of form.
Age. Instead, families relied on church records and family Bibles or personal memory, none of which held up against the federal government's demands for documentation. So when George and others like him were accused of giving false information, they weren't trying to break the law. Many simply didn't have the paperwork to prove the truth. George was a free man. He and his mother, Sarah, had been vindicated, cleared of any wrongdoing by an all-white federal grand jury. And in 1917 Texas, you couldn't ask for a better outcome than that. This should have been the end of it, but it wasn't. Because even though George and Sarah had been proven innocent, even though the evidence showed that they had done nothing wrong, they were still guilty of one thing, being black. And in that time, that was the only charge that mattered. It didn't matter if you were cleared of wrongdoing. It didn't matter if the evidence proved you were right. It didn't matter what the truth was. All that mattered was your race. And in
I'm telling y'all, well, I'm going to show y'all better than I can tell y'all next time. I got something.
a town like this, that was enough. Being black meant that you were already charged, prosecuted, and convicted, no matter what the law said. And for some white people in town, the fact that George and Sarah had been freed only made them angrier. After getting out of jail, George just wanted to move on. He returned to Dodge, hoping to pick back up where he left off, to live his life in peace. But he was wrong. He wouldn't be able to do that. The white people in town hadn't forgotten, and they hadn't forgiven, and they hated the fact that George had walked free. To them, he hadn't just escaped a conviction. He had cheated the system, gotten out of military service, and worse, he had won. Remember, Texas was relentless in prosecuting black men for draft dodging. And George's freedom, his very presence in town, was a daily reminder that they had lost, that a black man had beaten them. They saw him walking the streets, going about his life, and they couldn't stand it. Because in their eyes, a black man wasn't supposed to win. He was supposed to lose every time.
The hate in their heart for us is just but like I shared a video on this app the other day, and it was a sister talking, and she was talking about how they have all this hate for us and all this, you know what I mean, this negative energy towards us. But how can you be mad at us when it was your great grandparents and their parents who taught this lie, who did all these wicked things to make this that we see today for you? They did all that for you, and you mad at us because we exposing it. That makes no sense to me. But they don't want to be held accountable for what their ancestors did to our ancestors. And when we speak about what took place and what happened to our ancestors, They want us to forget about it. It was so long ago. But their ancestors did what they did to our ancestors so they could have what they have today.
Time. He was supposed to lose even when he was right and didn't do anything wrong. Blackness convicted you. And when a black person did win, white rule always found a way to make him pay. His victory was a crime. This wasn't justice in America. Winning didn't mean safety. It didn't mean freedom. Because for a black person, winning often meant losing everything. And for George, his freedom wasn't victory. It meant that he would be attacked and they would come after him. In late May of 18, George was out in Dodge. It's not exactly known where he was or what he was doing, but according to news reports, he was on the street when he was approached by a man named Alvin Peter Allen. Allen was the father-in-law of Sheriff King, and he didn't like the fact that George and his mother had not been prosecuted. So he took it upon himself to reprimand George for refusing to register for the draft. Allen told George that he was going to make sure that he was arrested again for failing to register for the upcoming June draft. But apparently, George had had enough. He was tired of the insults, tired of being harassed by white men in town just because he had won his case and proved them wrong. He allegedly told Allen that he had nothing to fight for in the war. George was expressing the view that a lot of black people had, which is that freedom abroad in Europe meant nothing if they weren't given freedom at home. That's when things escalated. The situation became more heated, and George pulled out his weapon.
That's what I'm saying, and I know y'all want to hear it, so I'm going to take it back a little bit, but how you want me to fight for you when you treat me like shit? Excuse my French. But how you want me to fight for you when you treat me like 3/5 of a human? When you treat me less than, but you want me to go fight for you after you just did what you did to me? Come on, man. You just beat me, whip me, lynch me, spit on me, gave me a separate water fountain, separate restrooms, less education. But you want me to fight for you.
That's when things escalated. The situation became more heated, and George pulled out his weapon to defend himself. This single act of George standing up for himself sealed his fate. People already hated him. They saw him as a cheat, a man who had beaten their system. But now he wasn't just free, he was fighting back. He was defending himself, speaking up for himself, refusing to back down. And that was too much for them to handle. This was the last straw. Black people were expected to be subservient, to be silent, to take every insult, every slight, every humiliation without resistance, to endure every injustice without speaking so much as a mumbling word. But George broke those rules. His defiance wasn't just seen as disrespect. It was seen as an act of war. In their response, it would be swift and brutal and merciless. It didn't take long for authorities to react, because George's act of bravery sent shockwaves throughout the entire white community there. And soon, a warrant was issued for his arrest. Let's take a step back for a second and just review how we got here. All of this was driven by hate. George and Sarah were arrested because of hate. An all-white federal grand jury cleared them, but even after proving their innocence, they were still vilified. Because during this time, hate always had to win. Hate always had to have the final say when it came to black people. Truth was a fiction if you were black. It was make-believe. It didn't matter what the truth was. Black people weren't entitled to the truth. Hate ruled the day. George did nothing wrong on that street, but hate didn't care. Hate started the confrontation. And now, because of hate, because of racism, because of injustice, they were coming to finish what they started. This is what I mean when I say that injustice for black people was inescapable. You couldn't go over it, couldn't go around it, couldn't go under it. Injustice was everywhere, and no matter how good you were, no matter how hard you worked or kept to yourself, sooner or later, hatred and injustice was going to come for you. And for George, there was never a way out. Racism and hatred was going to come for him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The moment Sheriff Tom King accused him and Sarah of draft dodging, there was going to be an unjust outcome, no matter what. Injustice always had to win every time it came to a black person. On May 31st, 1918, Sheriff King and a group of law enforcement officers came to the Cabiness home. And we know why they were there. They came for George. George had already escaped punishment twice. First, when an all-white jury cleared him of draft dodging. And second, when he stood up to the sheriff's father-in-law on the street. But this time, he wouldn't be so lucky. What happened next isn't exactly clear. Reports conflict and details are murky, but the outcome we do know. The outcome was clear and undeniable. When they arrived at the Cabiness home, Sheriff King and his men opened fire on George, ending his life right there in front of his mother and siblings. And yet, when the news broke, every report blamed George and his family.
As they did, that's just like with the massacre and so many others, they'll make it seem like, I'll give you an example. Remember me and the brother I was doing community work with, we do our community work, you know what I mean? We help out in the town or whatever, but we went to a city hall meeting. They were talking about this incident where this mentally ill woman had got beaten by the police down here, and they tased her, you know what I mean? She had locked herself in the bathroom or something. If I find the video, I'll put it up. But we went to the city hall meeting, and they were passing around these images, these photos. It was like a bunch of copies of a photo. And then the copies, it was of people who supposedly had resisted arrest. And they were all beat up, had all these marks all around their faces, busted lips, busted faces and stuff, you know. But the reality, like they try to paint it like these people were just violent.
One paper claimed that when Sheriff King arrived, George resisted arrest, so they had no choice but to fire on him. But another version went even further. The Houston Chronicle reported that Sarah and George's sister Bessie were armed and waiting, ready to attack the officers. The sheriff's men, they claimed, fired in self-defense, and in the chaos, George was fatally wounded. But that version of events makes no sense. For this version of events to be true, it will mean that there was never any attempt to arrest George. And if Sarah and Bessie were really armed and ready to fire, then why weren't they arrested? It wasn't as if they had a problem arresting Sarah because they had done it before when they came to the house to arrest George. And more importantly, do you really believe that a group of white men in 1918 would have let two black women live after they allegedly pulled weapons on them? Because
Right, they would have killed them same way they did Fred Hampton. This is what I just thought about when he was talking about how they just pulled up and just killed this man. Same way they did Fred Hampton. Tried to make it seem like he was creating this militant organization that was just this problem.
I don't believe that at all. Lynching black women was not uncommon. I've covered stories of black women being lynched in Texas and all across the South. They had no hesitation doing this. None. What makes more sense is that the men came not to arrest George, but they came to carry out his execution. And that's exactly what they did. But they weren't done. Taking George's life wasn't enough. The horror they intended for the Cabiness family was just beginning. From here, things only got more ridiculous. The lies, the excuses, the versions of events they told to justify what was about to happen to the Cabiness family. And let me tell you up front, I don't believe a single word of it. And after you hear what they claimed happened, you won't either. So really listen to this story that they laid out, the one that they used to justify what happened next. The next day, Friday, May 31st, things went from bad to horrific. George was gone, and his family was mourning his loss. That's when Mose Allen, the son of Alvin Allen, claimed that another black man from the area came to him and warned him about a secret plot. A plot, he said, where the Cabiness family was planning to wipe out the entire Allen family. But that's not all. Mose said that later that night, around 10 p.m., George's brother, Pete, was spotted outside the Allen home. He was allegedly carrying a large weapon. The Allens claimed that they opened fire on Pete, taking his life. And then, as if that wasn't unbelievable enough, they said they dragged his body back to the Cabiness home 2 miles away. Now tell me, does any of that make sense?
So the man came to your house, planning to attack you, planning to kill you. You kill him, and you drag him back all the way to his home. Does that make sense? The man came to your house to kill you. You kill him, take him all the way back home, and that's where you report the crime?
Of course not, because it's not true. And here's another thing. If Mose Allen was really told about a secret plot to wipe out his family, why didn't he go straight to his brother-in-law, Sheriff King? If there was a planned attack on their family, why not have the sheriff go to the Cabiness home and immediately arrest the family? Why would they sit inside their home just waiting to be attacked? That makes no sense, because it never happened. No black man in 1918 Texas would have done this. It would have been an immediate death sentence, not just for himself, but for his entire family
He would have got
and every black person in the area. Lynching black people back then, it was like breathing air. It happened without thought, without hesitation, without effort. Between 1889 and 1918, over 260 black people were lynched in Texas. 60 of those lynchings happened between 1914 and 1918. So no, Pete Cabiness did not go on some lone wolf mission to avenge his brother's death. That story, it was a lie created for what was going to happen next, to justify what they had planned for the Cabiness family. An act of tremendous brutality, an act of pure savagery. From here, the story gets even harder to hear. Like the rest of this case, the details aren't clear. We know the press reports came from the same people who carried out the injustice, so we can assume that their version of events isn't accurate. But we do know the ending, and we can fill in the blanks based on what we know about what happened to the people during these times. It was injustice and brutality. Shortly after the sun rose the next morning on June 1st, 1918, a mob of white men showed up to the Cabiness home. First, I'll tell you what they claim happened, and then we'll break it down and show why it makes no sense. Sheriff King and his men never gave a clear reason for why they were there, but they were very clear about blaming the Cabiness family for what happened next. According to the mob, the moment they arrived, they were met with violence. They claimed the Cabiness family opened fire and that 6 weapons were used against them. The mob said they...
Do y'all really think that, again, okay, so first night they come kill the first son, the one that didn't draft, boom. The one that stood up, they kill him, boom. Second night, they say that one of the sons came and revenge for his brother. They kill him at their house, take him back home, boom. Now the third night, they claim that they were attacked with 6 guns, multiple firearms. Y'all believe that the white men were attacked with multiple firearms by this family?
They fired back in self-defense, and somehow in the course of this, the house caught on fire. As the family tried to escape the flames, the mob was waiting for them. According to some reports, Sarah began dragging her kids outside into the yard to escape the fire. It was then that the mob took her life execution style. Now, let me ask you again, does that make sense to you?
Yeah.
Because it doesn't to me, and it shouldn't to you either. And there are many reasons why. Let's start with these weapons the family supposedly had.
Right.
They claim that the Cabiness family had 6 weapons and opened fire on an innocent mob. That's not believable. That would mean that this black family in 1918 Texas had a large cache of weapons. George had a weapon when he pulled it out on Alvin P. Allen. Sheriff King claimed that George and Sarah and Bessie had weapons during the first confrontation when they took George's life. Pete Cabiness allegedly had a weapon when he went to the Allen home the night before. And now they want you to believe that this Cabiness family has 6 more large weapons on top of that. Does that sound believable? And then there's one more thing. The mob claimed that the Cabiness family fired over 200 times at them. And yet, just like every other confrontation with the Cabinnesses, somehow not a single white person was injured.
I was just finna say none of them were hit, but y'all are always killing this family. Make that make sense.
For this,
they had all this money, but come on, man.
This version of events to be true, that will mean that the Cabiness family owned at least 11 weapons, had hundreds of rounds of ammunition,
right,
and somehow they couldn't manage to strike a single person in the mob. Now, this story isn't over yet, so give me a few more moments, because there's more you need to hear. Something that sheds even more light on what really happened to the Cabiness family. News of the Cabiness family's fate reached the NAACP in New York City. The organization's executive secretary, John Shalady, sent a telegram to Texas Governor William P. Hobby, demanding an investigation and prosecution for what happened. But Governor Hobby didn't care. He didn't like outsiders attacking Texas or questioning the Southern way of life, especially when it came to how they dealt with black people. So the governor did nothing. And just like that, it looked like the Cabiness lynching was going to be just another name on the long list. Another black family wiped out. Another horrific crime swept under the rug. No investigation. No one held accountable. And to be honest, no one even cared. Because these were black people. And in America, any kind of injustice could happen to them. And life would go on like it never happened. Because injustice against black people wasn't just tolerated, it was normal. It was a part of the fabric of society. That was supposed to be the end of this story, until something happened in June of 1919. Almost 1 year later, the Galveston branch of the NAACP wrote to the national office in New York City with news that was about to expose the truth behind the lies told about the Cabiness lynching. Bessie Cabiness was alive. She had survived. Bessie was wounded during the attack on her family, but somehow she escaped. She made it to a hospital in Galveston where she was treated for her injuries. She had been struck in the head, in the chest, in the arms, and back.
When I do these videos for y'all, when I give y'all this information, whether it's something I'm reading or whatever, when I read this information, I hear it or just however it comes, when I receive this information, it's like the ancestors are speaking to me. It's like I hear their stories. And this platform, make sure y'all subscribe to. But hit that like button as well. But this platform is for the voiceless. And there's other platforms to tell these stories as well. But for the stories that y'all get on this channel, it's for those who don't have a voice to speak. And so we share their stories.
The attack left her crippled, but now she was finally well enough to talk, and the national office of the NAACP wasted no time. They told the Galveston branch to take her statement at once. Bessie told a story that was the complete opposite of what had been reported in the press. Remember, the press account blamed the Cabiness family for everything that happened. But according to Bessie, none of what the press reported ever happened. Bessie, who was now 25 years old, said that Mose Allen and the mob formed a posse to take her brother George's life. She said that on the day of the incident, she was with her mother Sarah and 3 of her brothers, Allen, Clufy, and Tanola. She said that the mob came to their home and surrounded it. No one in her family was armed. She said that the mob was led by Mose Allen, Senator Hollins, who was a town marshal from Birmingham, Sheriff's Deputy Sam Rourke, James Jones, and Sheriff Tom King. And there were others too, but she just didn't know their names. According to Bessie, the mob opened fire on her family as soon as they got there, and then they burned their home with them inside. They wouldn't let them escape. Bessie barely got out with her life. She was so scared she left everything behind, even her family's savings in the bank. She said she didn't want anyone to know she was alive because she knew if they found out, they would come back and finish what they started. After learning the details from Bessie, the NAACP began to formulate a plan to bring attention to the lynching and determine what legal action could be taken. But ultimately, they were not able to do anything. In January of 1920, Bessie left Galveston and moved to Baltimore for her safety. But sadly, just over 1 month later, she died from tuberculosis. And with her, the truth of what happened to her family also died. No one was ever held accountable. Sheriff Tommy King died in 1948.
That seemed like that's the result in all these incidents. Emmett Till, Tamir Rice, George Stinney. I mean, there's so many. This seems like an occurrence in so many events. Emmett Till's, the George Stinneys, the Tamir Rices, what's the young brother who was killed over the bottle? I mean, the drink. I have his face in my head. I can't think of his name right now. And I apologize, young brother. The Ayanna Jones. I mean, there's so many. What's the boy that was killed by George Zimmerman? Y'all know his name. Put his name in the comments. But it's like all these cases, no one's ever held accountable. Why? Because of the status. Because of this black label. We gotta let go of that label. That's not gonna be the only thing that's gonna change it, but that's a start.
At the age of 64, he went on with his life and raised his children and lived with respect and dignity. Alvin P. Allen died in 1928 at the age of 77. His son, Mose Allen, died in 1963 at the age of 83 after working as a guard at the state prison in Huntsville. He retired from that job and lived a long life and was married with 6 children. These men carried out a horrific act against the Cabiness family, but they faced no consequences. Elijah Cabiness had made it through slavery, overcoming unimaginable barriers to build something for himself and his family. But the same forces that once enslaved him will be the same forces that would take the lives of his descendants. They would erase them. His family survived slavery, but his family could not survive Jim Crow. All of their hard work, all of their sacrifices, it was as if it had been for nothing. Jim Crow took everything. An entire family burned alive in their own home simply for daring to stand up for themselves. They won the draft case, but they lost their lives for it. For them, success was a crime. Being black meant you could be erased from existence without reason, and no one would be held accountable. After these men carried out this lynching, they simply went back to their lives, as if nothing had happened. They continued with birthday parties and weddings and family gatherings, watching their children and grandchildren grow up, while the Cabiness family was...
Like I said, and I'm going to end it on this. For those who get upset because we share this information, You can't be upset with us for what your grandparents did to us or our grandparents. You know what I'm saying? We are reacting or we are responding to it. We are making awareness of what took place. You can't be mad at us because of something that the lies that were taught to you and passed down from family generation to generation to generation, and now those lies are being exposed. If y'all made it this far in the video, like I said, leave a comment. Let me know your thoughts on the video. I'll catch y'all on the next one. Peace and love, family.